So hello and a very warm welcome to this event and at Carnegie Europe, an event organized in cooperation with the Körber Foundation in Germany. My name is Alexandra von Nahmen. I'm very happy to be here with you. And today we will be speaking about the latest edition of the Berlin Pulse, an annual survey conducted by the Körber Foundation. And I'm certain that it will be very interesting to see how public opinion on foreign policy issues in Germany has evolved over the last year. And let me introduce our panelists. I will start with Julia Ganter, Program Director at the Berlin Pulse at Körber, who will help us understand the findings of the survey. Welcome, very happy to have you here again. Also, very well welcome to Viola von Cramon. She is member of the European Parliament for the German Greens, and we will have a lot of questions to you as well. Very glad to see you. And last but not least, of course, Ambassador Pierre Vimont, a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe. He is also with us today. Great to see you. And let me start with introducing or welcoming Julia once more time and asking her to present the key finding of the survey this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome also from my side. Really nice that you are here despite the weather and that we have people watching online. And my special thanks, first of all, goes also to Carnegie and to Tanguy, who has put together this event. Thank you very much. We tonight want to assess Berlin's leadership role. So I thought when deciding on which of our Berlin Pulse survey results I'm going to talk about tonight, I picked those that make us maybe understand a little bit better how Berlin's leadership role within Europe could be understood. Before I do that, I just want to say some words on the publication and also our methodology, because I believe that it's important to know where numbers come from when we talk about them. So the Berlin Pulse, and you'll find some more hard copies in the back, is a publication that we do since 2017. We annually ask the German public what they think about a variety of foreign policy issues. And we do the survey together with the Pew Research Center. So at one or two moments, I'm going to show you some results from the US, and our partner in Washington has surveyed those results. Our survey is a representative survey. So we are asking at least 1,000 Germans that are able to vote in Germany, so 18 years and older. And it's a telephone survey conducted by Ganter Public, which is a very big institution in Germany and also internationally. And we have surveyed this year's questionnaire from the 6th to the 12th of September, which is important because we all know what happened on the 7th of October. Okay, this just as a little background to our publication. Now, when talking about leadership, I want to share 4 observations and 1 outlook with you. And the first observation is that in Germany, we can, on the one hand, perceive that Germans think that Zeitenwende, so the turning point in German foreign and defense policy that was announced by the Chancellor right after the invasion of Ukraine, is not really something that has changed their mindset about German international influence. So 2 years after, almost 2 years after the invasion of Ukraine, and various foreign policy shifts, a majority of Germans believes that our international influence has decreased. And this self-perception also differs from how Americans, for example, look at us. So most Americans, the majority of Americans, they say that Germany's international influence hasn't changed in the past 2 years. So what we get from this is that when you look at it from a domestic perspective, that Zeitenwende rather had an opposite effect. It was supposed to increase our influence to some extent. And from an external perspective, it didn't have an effect at all, at least for a majority of Americans. Now, one could guess that this influence could lead to a motivation for Germans to engage more internationally, to kind of change this trend that they are perceiving. But the reality is that a majority of Germans this year, as well as in previous years, does not want its country to engage more strongly. This hasn't changed after the war in Ukraine. Like, we did some polling last year right after the invasion, and we saw that a majority of Germans had a different view. They were in favor of a stronger engagement. But then when we polled our annual survey again in August, results were very similar to this year. And this is something we can see since 2017, so there's not really a change going on. The second observation I want to share with you is that we have started last year to ask those Germans in favor of a stronger international engagement if this engagement should be more military, more diplomatically, or if we should engage more financially. And the part, so these 38% from the previous graph, who is in favor of a stronger international engagement, they want this engagement to be diplomatic. And this is also an 11 percentage point increase compared to last year. And an explanation from our perspective could be that in the times that we are currently living through that are very much impacted by wars, the public perceives this diplomatic engagement maybe rather as a peaceful engagement, whereas military engagement might not be seen as an engagement that fits to this peaceful mindset that Germans have. And this leads me also to another observation maybe, or explanation for this result, which is that after the Second World War, we really created a nation that was rather civil power and trading nation, and not so much focused on these hard politics, security questions. And this is also a legacy that impacts how German foreign policy is at this very moment supposed to be, namely values-based. Like our current foreign minister, she puts a very big emphasis on a values-based foreign policy. So we have asked Germans if they think that the government is doing a good job with this values-based foreign policy. And as you can see, Germans are rather divided on this. However, one has to say that if you look at the overall rating of the German public when it comes to its government, it's currently very negative. It's more negative than the rating of the values-based foreign policy approach. So this could be maybe kind of a positive aspect coming from this result. Now, the third observation that I want to share with you is that when it comes to leadership in general, Germans are rather reactive, and not proactive. So we've asked Germans if Germany should assume a military leadership role in Europe. This is a question that we have asked last year for the first time, and we can see a very similar result. So this year again, 7 out of 10 Germans, they don't want Germany to assume such a leadership role, which is, if you followed what the German Chancellor has said in the past, Germany should assume such a leadership role, kind of the opposite of the government's position right after the invasion of Ukraine. However, when we asked Germans if Germany should invest 2% of its GDP in defense, we can see that over 70% think that this is the right thing to do, or even want Germany to spend more money on defense. And for some people, or also for us, maybe at a first glance, this might be rather contradictory. So Germans don't want to assume a military leadership role, but then they are fine with spending at least 2% of their GDP for defense. But from our perspective, and as I've mentioned in the observation, it makes sense because Germans assume this rather reactive positioning, but they would never agree upon a proactive position in Europe. And this maybe indicates that some of the talks during the past 2 years about the necessity to invest in defense, in our military, is a message that has arrived in the public. The last observation that I want to share with you, and this is maybe a big but to everything that I've said before about the civilian power mindset of Germans and the rather reactive and not proactive stance, is that when we ask Germans about a very specific topic, namely Ukraine in this case, Germans are able to overthrow this civilian power mindset. We have asked Germans if they would like to continue to provide military equipment to Ukraine. And as you can see, 66% of Germans, they are in favor of a continuation of military support for Ukraine. And I'd say that Germans might be even a little bit braver when it comes to this very specific topic of engagement, because we have also asked them, like the part of the Germans who are in favor of a continuation of this military support, why should Germany do this? And as you can see, a slight majority wants to continue with support, not only to make Russia stop where it is in Ukraine and not like attack Germany or Poland, but also to recapture the territory of Ukraine. And some of you might remember that the Chancellor refuses until this day to say that Ukraine must win this war. And I'd say that from this perspective, the German public has a slightly different opinion of this, at least 54%. And one reason to explain this might be that Germans kind of feel more military threatened than they also felt last year. So this year, 36% of Germans, they perceive Russia as a major military threat. And this is an increase of 11 percentage points compared to last year, of 14 percentage points. And this indicates that there's not a normalization of war also going on in the German public. Now, to maybe summarize these 4 observations, we can say that there's not really a desire to lead within the German public, that the German public has rather a reactive and not a proactive position. And those who are in favor of a stronger engagement, they rather stick to our history, to our civilian power mindset. But the case of Ukraine indicates that Germans are also, depending on the situation, able to change this kind of mindset. Now, to conclude, and maybe also for our debate, I want to share with you 3 results that might be leadership opportunities for Germany and Europe. So the first one is that Germany could lead by example when implementing its China strategy. So the first China strategy of Germany was published this year, and de-risking is a very big issue, as it is also in the European economic security context. And the German public, the German government would have the backing of the German public, because as you can see, 60% of Germans, they think that Germany should become more independent from China, should diversify more. So that would be a leadership opportunity, number 1 maybe. The second one would be that, and this is kind of linked to this first opportunity, that Germany could make its recently started charm offensive towards the global south a European charm offensive. Here again, the German government would have the backing of the German public, because a majority of Germans perceive the increase of influence of countries in the global south as something positive. And I didn't show you this result, but when you ask the same question for China, Germans are very negative. So 60% of Germans have a negative view on China's increasing influence, but 50% have a positive view on these global southern countries that we've asked for increase of international influence. And the last one is one where the government doesn't have a backing of the public yet, but I would say that Germany could take the lead for better communication at home and also within Europe when it comes to the EU enlargement and its conditions, and that this could be beneficial under certain conditions for European citizens. Because as you can see, the German public is really divided when we ask them about the EU enlargement and if it is something positive or not. And interesting, and this is my last point, is that if you look at age differences for this result, you can see that over 70% of Germans aged 18 to 34 years, they have a positive take on this. So they would perceive such an enlargement as something positive. And this indicates that maybe this new reform process that especially France and Germany are connecting to an EU enlargement, that this might be a narrative that, especially for an older generation, doesn't really come into play. They have kind of an historic memory maybe of the previous enlargement rounds. So anyway, Germany could take the lead and think about a new narrative that includes the young people who have a positive view and also includes older people who don't share this positive view. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And let me remind you online that you can ask your questions during our discussion, and we will also get to your questions. But let me start maybe with Viola. So I found it very striking that the majority of Germans are saying that the country's role has decreased over the last 2 years, and at the same time, only a minority wants Germany to be more engaged on the international stage. What do you make out of it?
Well, first of all, let me stress that this is super helpful, that we have the numbers and the figures. And I think surveys in general help us politicians to redirect our course, our communication, and to make sure that we are more inclusive. Second of all, you never do politics because the majority says this or thinks that. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes. Scholz is still into it, that he thinks it is enough to look at those figures and then try to rescale or redesign his political approach. I think if you decided to be elected as a representative of a parliament or as a head of state, it is up to you to explain to your citizens why you do things and why you take certain decisions or not. And so what I think is striking is, of course, the contradictory results of some of the numbers. Maybe this is explained through our past, but also definitely through the very, very, very poor communication of our government. I would say, with an exemption of Robert Habeck and some others, it is really not to be understood, and this bad and poor reputation right now at the moment has really its roots in there is no direction. Nobody understands what's actually going on. And the third thing is, I guess that Merkel in 2014 was so much reluctant to go much bolder against Russia and its first invasion against Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, that everyone thought this can go ahead like this. And if we had a more decisive decision within the European Union, where I guess if she would have taken the lead there, she could have convinced the majority to be much more decisive in military, financial, and personal terms, but also go against Russia with sanctions. But at that point, and it was one of the things, German think it is okay to be diplomatic and reactive, and instead of being proactive, explaining, and I would say it is also a kind of preventive measures. What we see at the moment is, and I've just returned from Ukraine. I would have been there 5 times this year and 4 times after the war last year, so 10 times altogether. And I think it would be absolutely important to explain what Russia does at the moment and what Russia is up to. And for this, it would be super helpful if we really had a study on what capacities has Russia built up, how many tanks are they building per week, how many ammunition they are preparing for what, and so on. So nobody speaks about the real threat. And this question of, is Russia a minor threat or major threat? How can somebody, I don't know, in Thüringen or in Baden-Württemberg know about that? Nobody has a clue. We need the facts and the figures. We need more evidence base. We have to come out with a proper explanation, and also on paying. I mean, yes, the 2% is completely new for the German population, and I think all of us, be it Greens or conservatives, were surprised that then there was the speech about the Zeitenwende, and we were mainly positively surprised. But then it did not force into action. It did not translate into obligations to invest really in this and change the mindset of the people. So it is not enough just to announce things. You really have to take serious action, and you need a mainstreaming communication, and that is lacking. And I think this is what the figures show. I can go more into details on all of the slides, but I think for a general explanation, I would leave it there.
And Pierre, I guess you are not surprised that Germans favor international restraint. That's probably not surprising. Is it up to date? What do you think?
First of all, I would like to be cautious myself, because I feel somewhat uneasy about focusing only on the German population, but that's the nature of the survey. But I guess that in many other European countries, we could maybe detect the same kind of trend, which is also maybe inspired by a little bit of realism on behalf of many Europeans. The fact that they see where Europe stands at the moment, confronted to this great power politics from the great global actors in the international field, and the feeling, the perception that Europe is not there. So that would be my first observation. Let's be somewhat cautious. The reaction may not be only a German reaction, it may be more spread, at least in Western Europe. I think in Central and Eastern Europe it may be different because of the proximity, of course, the geographical proximity with Russia, which means that the Russian threat is much more felt there than in other parts. But then my second observation, and this is where I would like to go, is there is something I find quite interesting in the fact that here in this place, we're all talking about geopolitical Europe and the need for Europe to be a geopolitical actor, to speak the language of power, so on and so forth. And there we have the German population saying more or less, this is not what I want. I don't want to be engaged more in world power. So this kind of disconnection between the institutional leadership on one side, or not only some leaders from different member states, think about Macron, strategic autonomy, European sovereignty, so on and so forth. The disconnection between the leadership and the population is quite striking. And it seems to me it has a lot to do, as you rightly said, about communication. But my impression is that it is much more deep-rooted. And this is where I think we may have to reflect a little bit more about this. Because what does geopolitical power mean? Do we all together, Europeans, have understood what it really is about? And I think there is a lot of work to be done from all of us here in Brussels, in the EU institution, in the different member states about what exactly does it mean. I think at the end of the day, it's about a different mindset, a different mentality. And I still think we haven't understood exactly what it means. If you want to be a geopolitical power today, when you look at Ukraine, when you look at the Middle East ongoing crisis, but if you look at the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan against Armenia, today in Latin America, Venezuela and Guyana, etc. If you want to be a geopolitical actor, it means finding your right place on the international scene, being ready to set up some kind of strategy that is much more than what is usually done today in the EU's communication about the different regions of the world. It's not about just putting together policies in the trade sector, in cooperation, etc. It's to have a real full-fledged overall vision of what you want to be, the kind of responsibilities you're ready to take over, and how you're going to do this. And where I very much agree here with what you just said is that we haven't really, either at the level of the EU institution or at the level of the EU leaders, gone into that kind of explanation, into that kind of building up a narrative that goes with this idea of being a geopolitical actor, and therefore not having been able to help our public opinion, our population, to understand what this is all about. There is no real explanation about what a geopolitical Europe is about, and what are the different implications of that goal. Because I personally think we don't understand either what it means to some extent. The leaders are not ready to go right into that direction, because otherwise they wouldn't be behaving the way they're behaving at the moment with regard to Ukraine or even the conflict in Gaza.
Ask Julia about that, because you've been, or the Körber Foundation has been doing it for quite a while. So do you see that this disconnect that Pierre was talking about, that it's something that is new, or it's something that you have seen in previous surveys?
So I think that at least when it comes to the German public, that's what I can talk about. We, to some extent, can see this disconnect for quite a while, since 2017 when we started. But I think it got bigger because the German politicians, they changed their foreign policy approach after at least rhetorically, for the first time in 2014, when Germany started on a rhetorical level to talk about we need to take over more responsibility. And now last year, with a special fund, with the decision to spend more for German military, our defense minister recently talked about Germany needs to become fit for war. And I think this is not really something that is reflected. I mean, of course, people agree to spend 2% of GDP, but people don't see itself in this kind of rhetoric that parts of the German government are using from time to time. Now, this is a rhetorical approach. We still don't spend 2% of GDP, so maybe if we look at the reality and then at the public view, it doesn't diverge as much. But I think from a rhetorical level and comparing this to the public view, this is a difference that we can see for quite a while already.
But interestingly, Viola, the Germans seem to be more willing to lead on Ukraine specifically than the German chancellor. So that's also interesting, because we are talking about waning unity, support for Ukraine, and then we have the results here showing that the Germans would like to continue supporting Ukraine. So could the German government be bolder?
I think they can. I mean, we have more than 1 million Ukrainians in Germany, and of course there is a lot of interaction. There are a lot of stories being told. I mean, if you have spoken to political prisoners who were kept in captivity, in Russian captivity for 3 years, and you hear these terrible torture stories, rape stories, and so on, you can't just say, we don't care. Whether the Russians occupy Ukraine, whether they want to destroy the Ukrainian culture and identity and nation and whatsoever, we don't care. Because there is a security threat, not just to Ukraine. And I think that is at least being told many times now in many parts of the German society, and they have understood, maybe not at the extent we wish, but more than at least some in the coalition, that we have to do more, also in our own interest. And I mean, I do understand the figures, because we have benefited for so long from the cheap Russian gas. We had a very preferential tariffs, and we had an industry running on this preferential tariffs. And also in Russia, we had a lot of, I think, 7,500 German companies doing a lot of business, doing a lot of money. And now all this is being cut. And of course, there are family ties with these companies. And so these stories are being told back home. Have you seen, because of the Ukraine support, there is no opportunity, our business being shut off and so on. The same is true for China. And what is not in these figures is, yes, we speak about de-risking, but the 10 biggest German companies in China, after announcing the de-risking strategy, they have invested an extra, I don't know, only Volkswagen had 2 billion euros after the German government decided to de-risk. So is BASF, so are all the others. So they actually undermining the German foreign policy and the decision of the government to marginally de-risk from a dictatorship such as China. And that is, of course, something we need to explain to our to our public why we are doing this, why in the long run it will for their benefit. But if you just say we do this because China is a dictator, no, we have to explain what it meant for Corona when we didn't have any mask, when there's nothing available. How much money have we spent because we were so much dependent on some single suppliers and so on? And what does it mean for our society? Why we are speaking about bringing back a certain industry and so on. And I think that is not overall really understood by people. And yes, this is more costly. If you cannot have this division of labor, if you do not have the, let's say, optimal trade, the Pareto optimum, yes, it is more expensive. And then we come to the point where we are now. We have a budget which is completely crashed with the idea of repurposing the Corona funds. And now, of course, there's a competition between the different sectors, and people are afraid. They don't know what will be their future next year. And there, I see it's not maybe the best performance of the Ampel, of the traffic light coalition. But I'm not saying this is one decision or this is one person. It is more the accumulation of different threats coming together, plus the poor communication.
Now we can say that the German government is busy with itself, with solving this crisis, so maybe even more reluctant to taking a leadership role within the European Union, a role, Pierre, maybe that is now very needed to make sure that Europe is still united when it comes to Ukraine, to all the other issues, decoupling from China and so on. So is it a big problem?
No, you're right, but I think it's trying to find who could fulfill the role of leadership or take the leadership in Europe today is important. But in my opinion, it's not the most important nowadays. Going back to Ukraine, we're going to face a major rendezvous with the European Council in 1 week. And we're witnessing the unfolding of what I think, if it happens the way everybody thinks it's going to happen, the unfolding of a major political and diplomatic disaster. In other words, they won't agree on a financial package for Ukraine. They won't agree on additional military assistance to Ukraine. And furthermore, they won't agree on the opening of the accession process for Ukraine. So at the end of the day, if it goes that way, it's going to be a major and a political, the wrong political message to be sent not only to Kiev, to Moscow, of course. It would give the sense of a helpless, powerless Europe. If
used to be the ones to try to find a compromise.
Yes,
among,
but the question is not only about the German Chancellor, it's about the 27 or let's say the 26 other leaders who are saying, what is this all about? This is about Europe standing up to the challenge of Ukraine and being able to send the right message to the world, let's put it that way. This is what geopolitics is about. It's that at some point you have to act as a geopolitical power and to give the sense that you are fulfilling your responsibility and the space that is there for you. If you have that in mind, then you have to go ahead and whatever happens at the next European Council, you have to say whatever happens, the discussions we're going to have, at the end of the day, we have to come out with a positive decision for Kiev. And that's the way it works. And that's the way, let's be honest, the way it has worked in the past in the European Union. Leaders were used to make, the French would say, coup de force, upset everybody by just deciding that they go ahead. You know, I fear I must be the oldest in this room, and I apologize for that. But remember 1985, when they decided that they want to go ahead with the Single European Act and open the negotiation, and Mrs. Thatcher was there and of course says, no, I don't want to. And then the others told her, sorry, but we think we only need a simple majority to go ahead, and there we go. It was a political risk, no doubt about it, a major challenge for all of them. It worked, and we have been doing that time and again. We said to David Cramon, I'm sorry, once again, a British Prime Minister, but when he was trying to prevent the others to go ahead with more budgetary cohesion, they said, well, no, sorry, we're going to go ahead, and then we will not make it a decision by the 28 of us. It will be an intergovernmental decision. If need be, we have to invent something at next European Council because we need to go ahead. And politically, this is the message we have to send. So, of course, I hope Chancellor Scholz will be on that side, but maybe he will have a budgetary problem there. But you have to face it. If you're not able to send the right message to the Ukrainians, then you will give once more the feeling, the impression that Europe has been able to put its act together and that it is not the political leader it pretends to be.
You're welcome. If you have questions, here we go.
Thanks very much.
Maybe you can also wait for the mic and introduce yourself, if you may.
Yes? Yes.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi. And thanks very much for a very thought-provoking discussion. I wanted to, in a way, try to push further on this idea of a disconnect that Pierre was mentioning, and that in a way, Viola, you were also mentioning when you were referring to the need for greater communication. For 40, 50 years at least, the communication about Europe and the EU has been fundamentally about the idea that economic integration prevents war. So that process of moving into being a geopolitical actor involves a significant change in strategy, and perhaps it's not surprising that the communication on that takes quite a lot. First, and then second question quickly is about there is a lot of talk in the town at the moment about the growing risk of what happens in the US elections next year, and the fact that whereas in 2016 that kind of took everybody by surprise, if it happens next year, it won't take anybody by surprise, and therefore it needs to be prepared for. And so my question is whether part of that thinking could be related to the need for Europe to take certain responsibilities in the face of a growing possible threat. Thanks.
Maybe I can say
Sure.
about the US election, because we have numbers on that. I mean, you can find them all in the report or on the website, but I didn't include them because we focus on Germany and Europe. What we can see from a German perspective is that it really matters who sits in the White House. Since 2021, so the year after the last election, the view of Germans on transatlantic relations has completely changed. So now we're seeing that Germans are very positive. They rate transatlantic relations very positive. They have a very positive partnership perception of the US, with the exception to, for example, climate change, where not so many people, again, one has to say, perceived US as a partner. This has been different in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. Now people seem to be disappointed and they don't perceive the US so much as a partner on that issue. But overall, since Biden is in office, the view has really improved. And we have repeated this year a question that we have asked already in 2019, which is how would, and now this year, a re-election of Donald Trump impact your view on the transatlantic relationship? And over 80% of people in Germany have responded that it would have a negative impact on the transatlantic relationship. Just to say that here again, the German public would have the best excuse to use this numbers and think about what's actually going to happen and why we need to get our act together in Europe and motivate other colleagues within the European Union to think about some of the questions, because the public is well aware. I think politics is also aware, but they also have the public backing for this. Yeah.
And we also have a question from our audience online, a question about whether or how much the Scholz government has actually moved towards the risking from China that is apparently, according to the survey, being backed by the German public. Viola, would you like to take this one?
Well, it's hard to say. At least I think our China strategy was highly disputed within the government, and there was a lot of influence from China not to be too critical and so on. So I think they have seen this as, I wouldn't say a threat, but at least is major. Oh no, it's as more independent than in the past. And definitely, I think there are some tools either in place or will be in place when it comes to preventive measures on universities and journalism to make sure about espionage, industrial espionage, and so on. So I think that the level of awareness is much higher than a couple of years ago, through private sector, through scientific institutions, but also in politics. And that has, of course, also or backfires to the Chinese-German relation, but maybe also the Chinese-EU relation. But I would like to, if I may, just come back for a second to Patrick's two questions. I think that is absolutely right. We were all convinced, and I started my Eastern European career exactly on that. I went to Russia because I believed if we can intensify our trade relation, our economic relation, our cultural relation with the Russian society as such, this will prevent a war. This will make sure that there's a win-win situation. We all were based in this logic that we think, oh, there's so much to lose. Putin will never, ever start a big war. While, of course, if you look very rational on what Putin did all the time or for the last 10 years, it was very obvious. You had the Gerasimov's doctrine, you had all the speeches, you had his historical analysis and so on and so forth. But we all were exactly grown up with this idea, let's invest into economy, business, and so on, and then it will all be good. But now I think what we actually, at least in Germany, failed to have a clear analysis, to have an inquiry committee in the Bundestag. Why for so long? Everyone was shutting down, was shutting up, was not looking into journalism. Board journalists, I mean, maybe you have heard about the case now, Hubert Seipel, who has received 600,000 euros for a documentary and so on. And he will be not the only one. And we have not just one Schröder, we have many politicians on the payroll of bigger Russian state companies and so on. And this needs to be shown to the public. This is a security threat. We had let that happen for so long. So I think this assumption, trade, economy tries is enough to prevent a war is wrong. And now we are not working on this. The second thing is even more important. I'm very much afraid if Trump or somebody from the Trump camp gets re-elected, this will be not the Europe we have seen before. I'm pretty sure he will say Europeans can pay for their own security. He will say we have a lot to do in our own country. They are rich. Should they pay? And then we are not ready for that. As we have said before, we have not put a lot of also anticipated what it means to jump into the security. And Putin knows that. He just has to wait. Yeah, and then I know I don't want to be this Cassandra speaking about this topic all the time, but we have to do this. And this is what is lacking. I hope this will come up tomorrow at the council or the summit, but I'm not so sure that this is on everyone's agenda already that high.
Yeah, I have another question for Pierre, I think maybe. The question is whether it's time for an EU seat on the UN Security Council, and should France maybe, or would France cede its position in favor of a joint EU seat? We've been talking about that for quite a while.
Classical question, I see.
But important.
But it's an important one, you're right. the difficulty, let's be honest, if you, and that's what the French always answer, is that in legal terms, you can't solve that one. Because you need to be a nation state to have a seat in the UN Security Council. So you need to change the UN Charter before doing anything else. That doesn't prevent the Europeans maybe from inventing a way of sharing this one permanent seat among all of them and having clear rules about how to manage that seat and take the best opportunity out of it. And I'm very much in favor, but this is another matter to some extent. But there it is. Could I come back to one or 2 points that are there? The first one on economic integration, and Patrick is right about underlying debt, and I totally agree with what you said. But here again, I would like to try to go one step further. This was Europe pre-Maastricht, right? The whole European project was built at the time of the Cold War, as we all know, and it was very much inspired by that geopolitical reality. What I think none of us understood with what happened afterwards is that the European project was totally changing in nature, and we haven't understood that. It was coming out of being mainly a economic integration project to something quite different, because we were taking in our partners from Central and Eastern Europe, because suddenly this was becoming a totally different game, political game. And I think we haven't understood that. We haven't understood that in the sense that after the end of the Cold War, Europe was becoming a real political organization, and therefore had to play the game of all the other nations in the world, whereas we still pretended that we were some kind of strange political animal that was nice with everybody, that was only promoting values and had not European interests. Think about those with whom we negotiated trade agreements. They don't think for 1 second that we are only promoting values and not our interests, but we were in denial of all of this. And as we went on being in denial, we're facing now, we are confronted with the new reality. And I don't think we have still entirely understood what it means. And I think this is where we really need all together to change our mindset once again. I don't want to feel obsessed by this, but it seems to me that as long as we're not able to do that, we are caught in a bit of an entanglement and we don't know how to get out of this. Let me give you an example which strikes me a lot. We have discovered suddenly, it took us a long time, that our partners in the global south are now in a very strong divided relationship with us. The bridge has grown and more. Latin America, Africa, Asia, etc. And we're thinking, how could we bridge that gap? So the idea at the moment is to say, let's select a few group of countries and try to improve our partnership with them in the trade sector, in development assistance, so on and so forth. I happen, not being anymore in the EU institution, I happen to have many contacts with some representative from these countries. And what they're telling me is, it's the same old game. You're doing it all over again. You still don't understand what we're talking about. So, we want to be considered as legitimate partners. We want to be heard more than and listened to more than we have been in the past. And more than anything else, we want to understand where you want to go, what you want to be as a global power, what role do you want to take on the international scene. And we never get any answer from you. Coming back to Ukraine, what, in your opinion, as representative from the European Union, what should be the end game of the Ukrainian conflict? Full-fledged success against Russia? Some kind of compromise? This is what we want to hear. Realistic political game and the reality that is there. And you all come back to us time and again saying it's for the Ukrainians to decide. And they tell me it's We understand that. You have to say that. But you know, if you want to treat us as valuable partners, you have to go a little bit further down the road and start discussing with us about serious politics and serious policy and the traditional game of international relations, you know, as we used to do it for so long. We have lost a little bit of that know-how, it seems to me. And this is why many of our partners in the outside world are rather cross with us of not being able to have that kind of open, friendly, realistic exchanges with them. One word about China. We were just discussing that. We came out in 2019 with this communication once again. A partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. Everybody said, that's great. Chancellor Merkel, I remember, told us, it's the first time I read an interesting, well politically inspired communication. The problem is that once we have said that, we never managed to fill in what was in these different baskets. And nothing much changed, by the way. And that's the problem with the European Union. It has to find a new way of managing its relationship with a little bit more of a realistic approach and understanding that out there it's as a former German foreign minister was saying very rightly, Mr. Gabriel, out there they're full of carnivores, and we have to understand that and behave a little bit more like them. So that's why I'm time and again repeating that it's the state of mind, the mentality that makes the difference at the end of the day.
I would have two more questions from the online audience, and maybe we can ask them all together, or from you as well. Just one question about, Viola, I don't know how much time you still have here, because one question is about the European elections that we will be having in a couple of months. And the question is if the Alternative for Germany will take a large chunk of the votes. What does it mean for Germany and its role within the European Union? And the other question is also about the German position on the Israel-Gaza war, and whether this is, if there is a risk to negatively impact the public perception of the German foreign policy. I know two difficult questions, but I think they are just important also for the German foreign policy. And the third to you, and then the last question then.
Thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Rajai Barakat. I cover European affairs for many TVs, Arabophone TVs, BBC, France 24, and others. Don't you think, I have three short questions. The first one is, don't you think that the personality of Mrs. Merkel with the economic force of Germany make Germany as a leader, and now Germany lost a lot of its leadership because of the departure of Merkel? And I can't understand the position of the Greens in Germany and also the German government. Some experts say that Germany now is defending Israel during this war because the economic interest. Germany wants to buy the gas from the area and from Israel. And for this, the position of Germany is pro-Israeli, even with the crimes, and everybody is sees these crimes committed by Israel. More than 30,000 people are killed, and it's still going on during 2 months. 60% of Gaza is destroyed. Don't you think that, is it true that it's because of economic reasons? And Mr. Vimont, how can you explain this double standard policy when you compare at the EU, when you make the comparison between the position of EU in Ukraine against Russia and the position of EU now, which is really, I studied at ULB, In Brussels, I believe in libre examen, democracy, and all these things, international law, international humanitarian law. But now, I'm sorry, my origins are from Palestine, and I think that I don't want to do like what Gaddafi made once in the United States.
Double standards.
But I am losing many values on which I believe, and the European Union values. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who would like to go first? I mean, it's a lot, I know.
Questions. I try. So the European elections and the rise of AfD is, of course, of everyone's big concern. I mean, we're all extremely worried. There is not a simple solution for that, especially where we see that it is not, I don't want to be sound disrespectful, but of course it's not just one region, it's not just the East, but we have also seen during the last state elections in a very rich, comparable rich states such as Hessen or Baden-Württemberg or Bavaria, we saw quite high digit results for AfD, and that is worrying as well. So I think what we see that if people on one hand want to vote as a protest, they don't go for the opposition parties such as the conservatives or I don't know, maybe the left or somebody else from the conventional parties, but they go for the AfD. The AfD, no, the Alternative for Germany, they don't have any solution on Europe. They want to destroy Europe from inside, and we have more and more cases where you see that even Russian agent people working on Russia's pay list are running for the AfD in the Bundestag on other positions. And so, I mean, their first proposal was to even leave the European Union. This would be a disaster as such, and everything else they have mentioned would especially harm those people who will probably vote for the AfD. But to match this, to explain that, to explain the consequences of their voting decision, of course, you don't want to patronize them. You don't want to tell them, you shouldn't do this, but you need to convince people why this is really a bad decision, and what does it mean for Germany, for their region, and so on. This will not be easy, especially in this particular atmosphere, but of course we need to try, and we need to see that also the conservatives, the CDU will come up with a strong proposal. They have to explain to their conservative voters why they are the alternative, if you want so, and not the right wings, the extremists, the fascist party. Then the second question was, I think, on Israel-Gaza, and that maybe is also linked to your question here. I mean, maybe we heard different stories, but I don't think that Israel attacked Gaza. And what we have seen even this after the pause, it was not that the Israeli army started again bombarding, but it was Hamas starting shelling Israel. And sorry to say, I think if you speak to Jews in Europe, they're terribly afraid. And they tell you one thing: you are the ones who were putting us in gas chambers in 39 or even before and afterwards. Make sure we live now in safety. Make sure we can survive. Make sure we are safe here and we are safe in Israel. That doesn't mean that we have to support the government of Israel. We have to support and we have to make sure people with a Jewish background, Jews, have to have a place to live, and this is Israel. And if Hamas does go on like this, that is a problem. And if they use civilian infrastructure as... You know, I don't want to go into details. This is not about Israel or Gaza. You have asked me, will we defend Israel? Yes, we will. Yes, we will, because we have to. This is our obligation. That's what I need to say. And it is, of course, has a lot to do with the German history, but also it has to do with our obligation to make sure that Jews can live in, hopefully, in a secure environment. And then it was, I think, one more question regarding Merkel, and whether Merkel would be, let's say, a garant or a secure moment. I think that Merkel was very reactive, and she was not, I mean, yes, she made sure she can go for a compromise before a summit, before a summit, before a council. She went around and talked to each and everyone. That made things easier. I don't know whether the German delegation does that at the moment or not. I guess they will. But of course, with her being long-term in office, it's much easier than having somebody new. But that, I mean, I think you have linked it to trade relation and so on. I would think she actually has postponed many reforms also in Germany and in the EU. And I wish some things could have been done earlier on climate, on digitalization, on other steps for the EU integration and so on. I don't want to question her too much because I really have great respect for what she did. But I think part of the story is definitely that she was not leading enough on certain fields where we would have needed more leadership, as I said, in climate, in digital, and other questions.
Last words on that?
No, I can only repeat, I mean, with regard to Ukraine, there is clearly an aggressor, which is Russia. And the whole narrative about the double standards is very much a Russian narrative. Let's be honest about this. What happened on October the 7th, there was a clear aggressor, and that was Hamas, and we have to admit that. That doesn't mean, and this is where you want to go, I guess, and I agree with you, this doesn't mean that the right of self-defense allows Israel to go ahead with its ongoing military intervention in Gaza, because we're reaching the point where this is becoming unbearable. And you hear the Red Cross, the UN agencies, even to a very large extent, the US government, and of course many European governments saying there is a need to stop at one point. Why? Because I think there, very wisely, Joseph Borrell early on said the best way to ensure and guarantee the security of Israel is peace. It's not going ahead with a war that will destabilize the whole region even more. The problem we're facing is we're facing an Israeli government which at the moment wants to go full speed ahead with a full-fledged all-security policy, even in my opinion with the risk of going ahead with this idea of forced displacement of the Palestinian population out of Gaza. And let's be very careful about this, because this could destabilize even Egypt. And then you will have a new flow of migrants that will maybe reach the shores of Europe itself. And of course, this will bring about even a new round of a Palestinian uproar and turmoil that may be larger than we have seen many years ago. So this is about convincing the Israeli government that this must stop at one stage and that we must come back to the peace process as soon as possible. But be aware that more and more European governments are stating exactly that point. I was talking about Joseph Borrell, but the French president has said that. The Spanish prime minister is saying that. The Belgian prime minister is saying that. A lot of people are saying that. And President Biden, in his complicated situation where he stands with regard to Israel on one side, his own domestic politics on the other side, is trying to deliver that kind of message also to Israel. We'll see how it will go on, but this is what is important today. I think this whole idea about double standards and fighting pros and cons and going ahead with this is somewhat ridiculous compared to the reality of the ground, which is terrible and to which we need to bring a stop and then move out of this towards the management of Gaza, the reconstruction of Gaza, and then the peace process, and probably something akin to the two-state solution. This is where everybody should, at the moment, mobilize its efforts to move in that direction. I think that's really what it's about.
Yeah, thank you so much for summarizing all of it. We started with data. Julia would like to end with data. I cannot say no to her. So about the...
Just very briefly, because 2 words on 2 of the questions raised. From a public perspective, because we have this time, for the first year also, we can interpret responses from people who have a party preference in Germany for the AfD. We couldn't in the past because it was not enough respondents. This year, we had enough respondents to also analyze their responses. Whoever asked this question online, on our website is the table chart, and you can look into it if you really want to know more. But I want to just say some words. If they get a stronger vote in the European election, what at least people with this party preference would like to see is 91%, they're in favor of a stronger restraint of Germany from the world stage. So this is way more than the 50 something we have, 54 we have, I've shown you in the graph. They're really not in favor of supporting Ukraine. 76% with this party preference says we shouldn't support Ukraine anymore militarily. 83% say that EU expansion is not something positive. Also they're very much more favorable of China, and they don't really see Russia and China as a threat. This is a question I haven't shown you, but you can find it in the graph. So I just wanted to give you a little glance into these results and how their worldview kind of puts itself together when it comes to this voter basis. And maybe one word from a public perception on Merkel, because I remember that Olaf Scholz in his early days, he was called a female Merkel. So maybe just, this is a comparison to close from my side from a public perception. So maybe differences in their style are not even too big, because I think both have the capacity to sit and wait until something happens.
And he was campaigning on that.
That's why he won, probably. But thank you so much for everything. On a positive note, we still have 6 or 7 months to go for the election, so anything can happen. Thank you for being here, and thank you for our panel, to our panelists.